鐘有夠法定人數，咁而家呢，我哋就正式開展呢個會議，就進行指明牌照分配排放限額第5份技術備忘錄小組委員會主席嘅選舉。咁而家呢，就根據內務守則附錄4嘅選舉程序，請委員提名主席一職嘅人選，有效提名必須由一名會員。
In accordance with House rules, we now call for nominations. A nomination must be made by a member orally and seconded by another, and the nominee must also accept the nomination. I nominate Mr. Kenneth Leung as seconder. Mr. Dennis Kwok, Mr. Kenneth Leung, do you accept the nomination? Well, I believe there's no other nomination, so please come on to the stage, Mr. Leung. We have to elect Deputy Chairman, Ms. Sitho. Chairman, I have to attend another meeting, so I have to withdraw early. But before I do that, let me tell you my views. The content of the fifth memorandum is simple, but I believe this subcommittee should arrange a public hearing so that those who are concerned with emissions in Hong Kong and green groups can come to tell us their views. All right, let's make the arrangement for that. Members, some matters that I would like to draw your attention to, and that is the panel on environmental affairs discussed the fifth technical memorandum on the 29th of September 2015. Detailed background information on the memorandum is set out in the electrical brief provided by the administration, as well as a legal service division report and the background brief. Please invite the officials to join us now. They're all familiar faces: Mr. Andrew Lai, Mr. Mok Wai Chin, and Mr. Dave Ho, and Mr. Donald Ng. Welcome. If you're ready, may I invite the administration to introduce this memorandum. Mr. Lai, please. Thank you, Chairman. This is made under the Air Pollution Control Ordinance and by the Secretary for the Environment. This is the fifth one, and that it will regulate the emission of pollutants by power plants after 2020. Let me introduce the memorandum first. First, the legal justification. According to the Air Pollution Control Ordinance, the Secretary for Environment should at least once every 2 years review the allowances for the emission of power plants and should promulgate the upper limits, the allowances, in the form of a technical memorandum. And this will cover 3 major pollutants, and that is sulfur dioxide, nitrogen and oxides, and respirable suspended particulates. As the power plants have to tie in by introducing emission reduction arrangements. Therefore, the government has to give the power plants 4 full years in advance so as to meet the relevant targets. So this fifth technical memorandum, if this is to implement on the 1st of January 2020, it must be passed by this council by the end of this year, so that the power plants have 4 years to implement the memorandum. And according to the ordinance, when the Secretary set the emission allowances, he should consider the following factors. For example, the practical means of achieving the emission standards, and the impact on air pollution as well as the health implications. And let me now turn to the factors that we have taken into account. Last year, with the consent of this Council, we enacted the 4th Technical Memorandum. You may wish to ask that why do we have to introduce a 5th one to further tighten the emission allowances? Well, it's because last year there was a policy review of fuel mix for power generation. And after that, at the end of March this year, we published the public consultation document which set out the fuel mix for power generation beyond 2020. So this has to do with the installation of power plants, and this will present us with a new opportunity to come up with a new technical memorandum for the adoption of power plants. When we set the technical memorandum, we have had regard to the situation with the power plants, which are set out in paragraphs 6 and 7. We note that in terms of university electricity consumption, there is a slightly downward trend. And we know that for the new installations, they have 335 megawatt, and they will be using more natural gas in power generation. As a result, there's room for downward adjustment of the emission allowances. Therefore, for the Hong Kong Electric Company's emission allowances, there will be a reduction of 26 to 29% for different pollutants. For CLP, we are also taking into account its current situation. In Kowloon and NT, because of population growth, the demand for power is on the increase, and also under the new energy mix policy, we hope that CLP will continue to import more power from the Taiwan nuclear plant, and we hope this will continue after 2020. And this being the case, local generation will be reduced, and as a result, emissions allowances for different pollutants can be adjusted downwards. In this regard, the CLP would have to install more gas-fired plants, but since they are still working on this, and they have not yet finalized their plan. So for this particular memorandum, we have not taken into account the installation of new gas-fired generators. The reduction for CLP is from 9 to 12% for different pollutants. And we have set out the actual allowances for the 4 power stations beyond 2020, and you can find the information in the technical memorandum. Here I would like to highlight some of the implications. First, renewable energy. Last time at the panel on environmental affairs, we understood that members then were very concerned about renewable energy. You can see that there are certain formula with additions and deductions. This reflects our policy, and that is from renewable energy such as wind power, solar power, and waste-to-power generation. We have a new formula to calculate the emission. These renewable energy are cleaner, and they will take the place of coal-fired generation. For Hong Kong Electric, to meet our new allowances, they will have to install new gas-fired units. The EIA for this will be completed earlier next year. So when the time is right for finalizing the plan on the part of CLP, next year we are going to come up with another technical memorandum to regulate emissions after 2021. And that is we will take advantage of the introduction of new units to review the emission allowances. So this time there will be a new gas fire unit for HEC, and there will be tariff implications. So the Environment Bureau would be coming back to brief you in our annual exercise on the tariff implications. The tightening of the emission allowances is related to our agreement with Guangdong on meeting certain emission targets. So with new CLP units in the pipeline, that will be very helpful in reaching the target according to the agreement between Hong Kong and Guangdong. I'll pause here. I'm happy to take questions. Yes? Chairman, we have been talking about this for quite some time. We spent quite some time actually in the panel meeting. Last year I was the chair. Last time I was the chair, I didn't have much chance to ask questions.
Chairman, these are not new questions. I think the Deputy Director is very familiar with all this. Now, talking about emission from power plants, other than the three pollutants, many members are also concerned about PM 2.5, a type of RSP. And the government says that it's very difficult to measure PM 2.5 and it's already covered under PM 10. Is it really that difficult to measure? Look at Beijing. They have the relevant data. And even on the Internet, you can always look at the amount of PM 2.5. So why can't this be done in Hong Kong? Is it that you are not willing to do that? This is point number one. And point number two is about the control of pollutants. We are always talking about serious carbon emission from power plants. So why can't we control carbon emission? Because by controlling carbon emission, we can help to allay the problem of global warming. So why can't you also control these two types of pollutants? Mr. Lai? Thank you. First of all, about PM 2.5 and its measurements, as Mr. Chan Hakan pointed out, the EPD, the PDB's monitoring stations are already measuring the concentration of PM 2.5, and we have real-time data delivered on the Internet. However, when it comes to the power plants, the measurements would have to be very accurate, and we have to measure real-time inside the chimneys of the power plants. Now we are measuring three types of air pollutants: sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and respirable suspended particulates in real time. As for the measurements of PM 2.5, is already covered under PM 10. So why can't we measure the PM 2.5 particulates inside the chimneys in real time? Later on, my colleagues will explain to you. Well, actually, this is very challenging for advanced countries in the world. And when they measure the power plants emissions, they are still not measuring PM 2.5 because there are technical constraints. As for carbon emission, my colleague will also explain to you. Mr. Dave Ho. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, about PM 2.5. Internationally, in some advanced countries, for example, Euro countries and the US, they have not
come up with a restriction concerning PM2.5, and now we do not have a very accurate technology to measure PM2.5 inside chimneys. As Mr. Chen pointed out, when we measure PM2.5 in the atmosphere, it's not difficult. Many countries are already doing that, and Hong Kong has been doing that for a very long time. That is measuring PM2.5 in the atmosphere. However, for PM2.5 inside chimneys, because of the high humidity, there are difficulties. Now, for power plants, they have desulfurization devices, so they have to sprinkle water. So inside the chimneys, there are a lot of water particles, and they would be adhered to the PM2.5. So when you measure 2.5, you have to use collectors so as to screen the size of the particulates. Because of this water droplets, because they are adhered to the PM2.5 and they are big, so they cannot go through the collectors. So when you do the measurements, it's very difficult. So even in the United States, when they measure PM2.5 from power plants, they are still not doing an accurate job. Now there is no mature technology to do that. As for carbon dioxide, there is also a problem. Now we do not have a mature technology to collect or store and measure carbon dioxide. We are now at a very premature stage. So if we want to set an emission ceiling for the emission of CO2, first of all, we have to control CO2. But now we do not have the technology. So for allaying the emission of CO2, we now make use of fuel mix, and we will burn more gas instead of coal. I would like to ask another question about the measurements of PM2.5. When we talk about incinerators, we also talked about pollutants. So did you measure PM2.5 for that? So for incinerators, if you can measure PM2.5, so how come for power plants, when coal is fired, they also use the chimneys? So why can't you measure PM2.5? I can't remember. I'm asking my colleagues. Well, maybe I can supplement. I remember when we visited incinerators in March last year. Well, we went to Europe for that. I now remember the real-time measurements. I think they included PM2.5, but that's for incinerators, not for power plants. So for the gas emitted from incinerators, is the composition different from the gas emitted from power plants? So when you measure PM2.5 from incinerators, it's easier. Is that the case, Mr. Ho? Now, when we measure particulates in chimneys, well, we would measure the total RSP. And for power plants, we would also measure the total RSP. However, if you want to measure PM2.5, because there are a lot of water droplets, so when you measure it, it's very difficult to get an accurate reading. Even for the US and the Euro countries, they cannot do that. Mr. Chan Hakan? Well, I will go back and study more, and then I may raise other questions at the next meeting. I have another question. That's about the fuel mix. Just now we also mentioned it. Well, in the Secretariat's background brief, it is said that because we want to cut down on air pollutants. Which paragraph are you talking about? The paper number is CB bracket 131, 15 to 16, bracket 1, page 2. The footnote. It says that. Now, because we want to reach the emission standards now, CLP has a provisional agreement with Daya Bay, and they will be importing an extra 10% of nuclear power. So that is to allay the pressure on tariff increase. So that is the CLP's present practice. As we all know, natural gas is very expensive. So can we import more nuclear power? Maybe up to, maybe we can import all the nuclear power from Daya Bay, 100%. And also during the summer peak season, 100% of the Daya Bay nuclear power are imported into Hong Kong. So can we also do that in the winter, that is in the low season? Then we can have clean air and we can have cheap electricity. Is that possible? So your question is, all the power generated by Daya Bay to be imported into Hong Kong. Now there is a provisional arrangement of an extra 10%, that is from 2015 to 2018. So can we get 100% instead? Mr. Lai? Well, for Mr. Chen's suggestion, well, you are saying that we import 100% Daya Bay's power plant in Hong Kong. Actually, for CLP, now they are buying nuclear power from Daya Bay, and now is 70% of their capacity. And now there is a provisional arrangement, and they are importing an extra 10%. So now it's 80%, but it's just an average figure. During the summer peak season, it's up to 90%. As to whether we can do it throughout the year, that is, no matter whether it's the peak season or the low season, we will import 90% or even a higher figure. We have talked to the power companies, but there are technical problems. Now, it's because of the generation units. Now, for CLP, they have to make use of their own units, and they would have to operate their units in a different manner so as to tie in with that kind of import. So if they want to import over 90% throughout the year, there are difficulties. So according to your emission standards, can you tell us that when the fifth TM comes into operation, how much will our electricity cost per unit? According to the tariff, well, if you talk about the tariff increase, because now there is a change in the fuel mix, and of course natural gas is more expensive than coal. So in the future, there will be a pressure on the tariff level. But as to what will exactly happen in 2020, that is how much the tariff will be, there will be a lot of factors to be considered. For example, the price of natural gas. Now, in the past period, the gas price has been quite volatile. And also after 2018, our existing arrangement with the two companies will expire. So we will have to look at the NAV and look at the return again. So what will the rate of return be? All this will affect the tariff level in 2020. That is, by that time there will be a new fuel mix and there will be different situations. So it's not practicable to guess now as to what the tariff rates will be in 2020. Mr. Chan Ka-biu. Thank you, Chairman. I would also like to ask questions about technology and money. Of course, I welcome that the government tightened the emission allowances for air pollutants. I know 2020 will be an important year. I have several questions. First of all, I don't believe that in a short period of 5 years, Hong Kong's renewable energy will be significantly enhanced, and we will not be making a huge amount of gas for generation. I don't think that can be done by 2020. So I want to ask you a question. Technically, well, let us look at coal. Coal is cheaper than gas. So if we buy cleaner coal, and if we enhance the desulfurization facilities of coal-fired units, can we make an improvement? That is, if we use the same amount of coal, we can still reach the requirement set out by the 5th TM. Is that possible? Otherwise, the two power companies would say this, that is, well, for protecting the environment, we have to increase the tariff because we have to buy expensive gas. Is that the case? Can we buy cleaner coal? Is there still room for improvement? This is question number 1. And question number 2, according to your paper, you are saying that CLP will be generating more and more electricity because Kowloon and the NT will be seeing a higher population, and there will be more infrastructure. As for Hong Kong Island, there will be continuous drop in electricity demand. So when it comes to generation efficiency, if the gap between the generation capacity of the two power companies are getting bigger and bigger, would it affects the efficiency. For example, HEC has a lot of units, but it doesn't need to generate so much electricity, but the tariff level is high. However, CLP does not have enough units. It has to buy more units. So would this happen?
唔能夠好，我估計啊，唔能夠好輕易計到個好。
Well, I suspect the calculation won't be easy, saying that this is the optimal number for Hong Kong Electric and this is the optimum for CLP. What are there problems for the two to set things right? I know the MTRCL uses power generated by the two power companies. Is there any way that we can somewhat direct the resources to prevent a situation whereby one has a surplus, the other has a deficit, and the public suffer? Mr. Lai? Thank you, Mr. Tang. When the two power companies want to build new units, well, they need approval from the government. Therefore, the Environment Bureau will be the gatekeeper. My colleague would say something about whether we can use coal and achieve green objectives. Well, when we look at the emission allowances, we will all want to adopt practical and feasible solutions. The two power companies have been procuring environmentally friendly or low emission coal for power generation. But there are limitations as to the extent this can be done. First, the supply is restrictive. It's restricted to some countries such as Indonesia. You can't procure it all over the world, so supply is less certain. Second, this type of coal has a low burning temperature, so there's some loss of efficiency. So more coal will have to be consumed to generate the same amount of electricity. In the past, we depended mainly on coal for the power generation. The coal-fired units have been in operation for some time already, and someday their usable life will come to an end, and we should not extend the lifespan unnecessarily. We have been trying to limit the number of new gas-fired units. That's why for coal-fired units that have yet to reach their useful life, we asked the power company to install the desulfurization device so as to reduce the emissions. So we have been doing what we can to reduce emission of coal-fired units, but since they are coal-fired units, the emissions are higher than those emitted by gas-fired units. If we are to reduce air pollution further, the use of gas-fired units are going to be helpful. As for the grid of the two power companies, I'll defer to my colleague. The two power companies will have regard to the decommissioning time of their coal-fired units. When we assess whether there's a need to have new units installed, we'll look at the forecast on electricity demand and also the decommissioning timetable of existing units. Even for those units which have reached the decommissioning time limit, if they're still working well, we can consider deferring the decommissioning. And the other question raised by the member is whether the two power companies can back up one another so as to reduce the capacity reserve. Well, this is the practice adopted by Canada. In the consultation document we published, we gave an account on the grid connection between the two power companies. It already exists, and through interconnection, they have been able to reduce the reserve capacity to some extent. So there's already an interconnection that serves the proposed objective. In the past 1 year or two, energy prices dropped very significantly. I don't want you to divulge commercial contract details. I know that CLP is using the natural gas east-west pipeline. To what extent has the cost come down? Well, there is a clause in the contract signed by CLP that would enable the cost to be adjusted downwards in accordance with international pricing levels. But there's a time lag. Apart from the cost of gas, natural gas, CLP also has to invest in capital installations. So that particular component will not come down because of energy price drops. If gas continues to be cheap, the cost of CLP and the tariff will be affected. Can you tell us how much? And do we have any data? Well, it's commercially sensitive. We are not in a position to disclose that. What's the role of the government? Since the prices are low now, can we sign long-term contracts, taking advantage of the current low price levels, so that in the future we can be spared of tariff increases? Or each power company will have to sign contracts, and they have to disclose information to us. We'll look at the supply contract on the pricing mechanism, the pricing levels, and we will also get advice from our energy consultants to make sure that such energy contracts are in line with consumers' interests. On top, every year we'll have to assess and approve tariff adjustment proposals from the power companies. And you know that a big part of the tariff is made up of fuel price adjustments. So when we approve tariff adjustments proposals, we will look at how the fuel price adjustment is done to protect consumer interests. Mr. Tan Kap Yew, further questions? No? Okay. Then I will ask my questions. This is a follow-up to Mr. Tankapiu's question on the so-called environmentally friendly or green coal. If you use better coal, it's said that you have to burn more coal for the same amount of power generation. In the technical memorandum, in respect of the 3 pollutants, the regulation is going to be tighter and tighter, and next year we expect to have a 6th technical memorandum. In recent years, of course, we are concerned about the health implications of pollutants from the emissions. Mr. Tang mentioned PM 2.5. And we know that PM 2.5 is more hazardous than PM 10. But we are not able to solve the problem of CO2 emissions, even though you may use better coal. If you want to reduce CO2 emission, you have no choice but to use natural gas or nuclear power. This, I think, is already an established fact. Has the Environment Bureau conducted any study or collect any statistics on the amount of, in terms of tons, the amount of CO2 produced in Hong Kong and by the 2 power companies? Because power has to be generated to sustain our economic activity. You may not have any method which is strictly scientific, but have you ever measured the CO2 emissions or production? Well, when we have to deal with climate change, we are of course very concerned about CO2 emissions. Last week, we published the progress report on how we have been handling climate change, and power consumption is an important source of carbon emission. I think Mr. Ng can tell you more details. Chairman, if we look at 2012, the total CO2 emission was 43.1 megaton.
大約係即係6噸左右。
So it means 6 tons per capita. Compared with developed countries, we are lower in this regard because we don't have a lot of industrial activities. As for the source of CO2 emission, well, power plants are a major source. They account for about 68%, and then we have roadside vehicles accounting for 17%. I think that's roughly the breakdown. So power plants take up 60% to 70% of CO2 emission. We have known this for a long time. Turning to your climate change report, do you mention that how renewable energy can be connected to our grid? Do you have a roadmap for smaller renewable power generation units to be connected to our grid? Do you have any plan or roadmap for this? Ms. Ng, on renewable energy, I think as you have pointed out, Chairman, in Hong Kong, how can we make sure that the power generated by fragmented renewable energy installations be connected to our grid is very important in the work of promoting renewable energy. In the consultation document, we mentioned some proposals. The 2 power companies have put in place certain arrangements for such fragmented power generation to be connected. But such an arrangement has proved to be difficult because of the apportionment of responsibility and the question of insurance coverage. After we have received submission from the public, then we have to talk to 2 power companies concerning the arrangement after 2018.
上網個安排點樣可以便利翻
So that we know how power generation of that kind can be taken up in connections. There's a question of risk or technical apportionment for the feed-in. So the 2 power companies, we need to engage the power generators, the power generation entities to have a discussion. And then I have another question. It's about carbon emissions. Has the government conducted any new technology, study into new technology, for example, carbon absorption technology? Can we have something like that located near power plants? Since power plants are an important source of carbon emissions, if you have something called coming for carbon absorption, you can reduce the 60% to nothing. Have you conducted any feasibility study?
I'll ask Mr. Mok to answer this question. Chairman, all along we have been very concerned about this. That is, for the power plants, how can we recover the CO2 so that it won't be emitted to the atmosphere? We have a capture and store technology. And what is that? So through some methods, we will collect the CO2 and then it will be stored at a certain place underground. Now, if this technology is to be viable, there are some conditions. First of all, underground, there must be some very deep holes so that the CO2 can be contained there. That is exactly because of this. Not many places in the world use this capture and store technology, and it's also very difficult for Hong Kong. And if in some countries they have a petroleum excavation, then they can do that because they have already dug deep into the ground. And for places with this kind of topographical conditions, they are still trying it out only. I have read some technology journals. In Canada, they have taken the first step to do it. They want to use this technology. However, they are still facing a lot of technological or technical problems. So even though they have the natural environment to do that, it's still very difficult. And in Hong Kong, we do not have such deep holes. So it's difficult. And when people consider this technology, you still have to consider something. That is, you will have to use a lot of energy because you need to collect a lot of CO2 and you have to compress it deep down the ground. So you need to use a lot of energy. So we are very interested in technologies like this. And if there is a chance for Hong Kong to use such a technology, we will definitely study that. Mr. Tan Kapil, do you have other questions? I think we can adjourn the meeting now. Let us look at the legislative timetable. Well, originally the expiry of scrutiny period is the 25th of November 2015, and we have to report to the House Committee on the 13th of November. Just now, members agree that we will be inviting deputations to come for a public hearing. So I suggest that the expiry of scrutiny period be extended to the 16th of December. And if we do that, then on the 4th of December, we would have to report to the House Committee. If we extend the expiry of scrutiny period, to the 16th of December 2015, then we have to move a motion on the 18th of November or 25th of November at the council meeting. I would ask the Secretariat to arrange for a public hearing. So we will have to look at the result of the public hearing. So at the moment, I will not fix a date for our next meeting yet. If there is a need, I will consult members. AOB? If not, I would like to thank the government officials and members for attending the meeting.